Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're having a quick little discussion on the question of whether it is too late for Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD to come to Nintendo Switch this year, 2022. I'm recording this on July 23rd, so we are approaching the end of the 7th month of the year. There's only going to be 5 months left, the games have not been announced yet. Nintendo has a pretty good lineup already set. It's fairly dense in a few of these remaining months. Is there really enough time and space for these games to come out? And I think there's a few different angles to consider here. First off, we have been seeing Nintendo put out a fairly major Zelda effort every single year for the Nintendo Switch, every single calendar year. And while there's a decent chance the sequel to Breath of the Wild comes out in spring 2023 as Nintendo has told us, and that spring timing ends up being the end of the fiscal year, in other words, sometime in March of 2023, that would only put a Zelda release within the fiscal year, not the calendar year. So if Nintendo is to maintain the pattern of a major Zelda release every calendar year, they do need something. But with Breath of the Wild 2 in mind, that's not too far off from this year, and I believe the idea of having a Zelda release every single calendar year is to maintain the brand, to continue to build upon it, to take advantage of the ravenous Zelda fanbase. So from one angle, if they start to brand and merchandise Breath of the Wild 2 soon, there may not really be that much of a need to bring out another Zelda to sort of tide fans over. And I mean that in the sense that I don't think the Zelda brand will be impacted that much, because they could hype things incredibly well leading up to the release of Breath of the Wild 2 if it is going to hit that March timing, and the game could end up being one of the best-selling Zelda games ever. Perhaps they could even compare it to Breath of the Wild. Probably a big stretch, I understand that, but I do think it has a ceiling that could even potentially eclipse or rival Breath of the Wild sales. But again, that's the ceiling, more likely it'll be under it, but still one of the best-selling Zelda games ever. So even if we end up missing out on a Zelda release this calendar year, I don't think it would be the end of the world for the Zelda brand, not at all. But sticking to this idea of there being a regular Zelda release every calendar year, the other idea behind it, beyond just maintaining the brand and continuing to build upon it, is simply the guaranteed sales potential here. Because fact of the matter is, if Zelda is a part of a game on Switch, it's going to sell incredibly well. Breath of the Wild, the best-selling Zelda game of all time. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, the best-selling Warriors game ever. Skyward Sword HD, it outsold the original Skyward Sword on the Wii, which also sold over 100 million systems. And then Link's Awakening Remake also sold at least like 4 or 5 million, at least last I checked. So that game also sold incredibly well, one of the best-selling 2D Zeldas ever. Point is, if Zelda comes out on Switch, it sells really well. There's a lot of money to be made there. And another detail to consider here is that there have actually been a lot of Wii U games that have been brought over to Switch, either enhanced somewhat or just brought over pretty much as it was over, and a lot of them have sold really well. The Switch effect, games in general just sell better on Switch, especially compared to the Wii U, which had a much smaller install base. Not that many people had that system, so even when there were good games on there, they didn't enjoy the success they could have possibly had, and when they're on Switch, they do. For example, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It was an incredibly well-selling game on Wii U, but on Switch, it's like the best-selling Nintendo game ever, or one of them. It's ridiculous how well it's selling. It's one of the best-selling games ever. And what's great about this is that these games have already been made. The money has already been invested. To put these games out on Switch with minimal effort and guaranteed millions of sales, from a business perspective, makes tons of sense. Now you might argue, Breath of the Wild 2 is not that far off. They don't need to get a Zelda out now, and they could always release these games a couple years down the road as well, and they still probably will sell really well. So eventually Nintendo probably will still bank on these games. I think they will eventually come. It makes too much sense for them to not come. But the question is, will they make it out this year? And there have been a number of rumors suggesting that they could. For a while, it's been discussed that Nintendo has had these games pretty much done and completed and ready to go, and really, we don't know why they're waiting. The idea has been that they're just simply waiting for a time when they don't have a big Zelda ready for the calendar year. And here we are. We don't have a big Zelda ready for the calendar year. So why haven't they been announced yet? This could go back to Breath of the Wild 2 coming out early next year potentially. There may not be that much of a need. They may want to save these games when they really just don't have a good slate ready for a particular year and they know these games will sell really well. That could basically be it. They know this year is doing so well. But there are still holes for this year. August? Well, we don't really have any major Nintendo games coming out in August. September? So 2 and 3 is coming out then, but what about late September? What's coming out in late September? Nintendo could fit something in there. Typically during the second half of the year, we see multiple Nintendo games published per month. A lot of times 2, sometimes more, sometimes just 1. But point is, there's a lot of games that come out in the second half of the year. So it's not a stretch to think that Nintendo may fit in a remaster or two to fit somewhere in the second half of the year. So maybe September. October, I think at that point it's so late into the year that if it's just a port of a remaster, maybe October isn't the right time, not to mention Nintendo has multiple published games coming out in that month, Mario Rabbids in certain regions, and then also Bayonetta 3. So maybe we don't see them then if they were to come. November, even more so, just doesn't seem like the right time to release games like those. So I don't think they're coming out in November either, especially because I also believe there's another game Nintendo is saving to come out in November alongside Scarlet and Violet as their big sort of holiday releases. December, on the other hand, we have seen smaller releases come out in December, and also bigger, more hardcore-centric games come out in December. But it is also slightly past like that peak period to release a game, so maybe I could see them coming out then if they really want to get it out for December. But by the time it's December, if Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out in March, which again is an assumption that we do not know, but it is widely believed, I think that might be a little bit too short of a window, a little bit. But let's consider that perspective here, window of release. Can 2 different Zelda games come out within 6 months of each other? The answer is yes. One great example, we go back to when Four Swords and Wind Waker came out, they were just a few months separated from each other. This isn't the first example. So could we conceivably see another Zelda release, which again wouldn't be a new Zelda game, it would be a port of a game that was remastered. So there's a few layers of separation here from an original game. I think that is conceivable. December feels a little too soon for me, especially if it's going to be 2 games, which also is an assumption. Maybe we just get one of them, or also none, that's also an option. But it's also not entirely out of the realm of possibility either. A 4-month gap between Zelda games is doable. So conceivably, we could see these HD remasters come out in December. I doubt it. If they are coming out this year, it's not my bet, but it's conceivable to me. It's more conceivable than November or October, I'll tell you that. But in my opinion, if we are going to see these games, they are either coming out in August or September, which you may find interesting because we're just a week removed from the beginning of August. And they haven't announced them yet. Is there really enough time to announce these games and for them to come out in August? Or even September for that matter? Most Nintendo games are announced at least 4 or 5 months before they come out, at least. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's think about something that's comparable, right? Because it's not a Breath of the Wild 2 situation where these games are going to get teased and then they'll come out years later. It's not like that. These are games that were made many years ago. They got remastered for Wii U and we're hoping they're getting ported over to Switch. Very different situation. Something that may be somewhat comparable that people may look at is Skyward Sword HD. Skyward Sword HD got remastered for Switch. Wasn't ported over, it was remastered for Switch. It wasn't a straight up port, the game was enhanced in a variety of ways. It is the initial Skyward Sword HD release. But that game was announced February 2021 and it released July 2021, a 5-month window. So from that perspective, you'd say, well, there's no way these games are coming out this year. Maybe. But again, Skyward Sword HD is a different beast compared to a hypothetical Twilight Princess or Wind Waker HD. In my opinion, I actually think a better comparison is not Skyward Sword HD, but actually Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Now hold on a second, you may think, well, how is a Mario game more comparable to a Zelda game than a Zelda game? I'm talking about in terms of announcing this game and when they can release it. The idea of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD is that they are ports, maybe slightly changed for Switch, but they're basically games that have already been made. Not basically, pretty much entirely have been made already. And when I say made, I mean remastered, because they were made back in the early 2000s and then just got enhanced for the Wii U. And yeah, there's gonna be a need for some modification, sure, but it's nothing super dramatic that can be done fairly quickly with a small team with a small budget. But the point is, these games have been known quantities for many, many years. The fan base has a great understanding and awareness of these games, and there's a strong clamoring for them. And they've been rumored to Kingdom Come throughout the year, very similar to Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Now, Super Mario 3D All-Stars, those rumors that were coming from credible insiders were, I would say, more reliable or more confident in its release for that year, but still there's a similarity. And that game was announced in a Super Mario 35th Anniversary Direct at the beginning of September 3rd last I checked, and it released September 18th, a 2-week window, which is a staggeringly short amount of time between announcement and release. But if Nintendo could do that, they could also just as well do that for Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD. I don't think we're looking at a 2-week announcement to release window here, because I do think that that was an anomaly. I think that in large part had to do with the situation regarding the pandemic and a number of things being pushed or canceled or delayed throughout 2020. But a shorter window from announcement to release compared to most Nintendo games, I think is fairly conceivable. In fact, I'll even go as far as saying it's expected, at least by me. So it's conceivable to me that maybe this week, just a few days after the release of this video, it's announced and it's coming out maybe 3-4 weeks later. I could see that, or perhaps a week or two from now, it's announced and it comes out 3, 4, 5 weeks later. So maybe it doesn't quite hit August, it could, but it also could hit maybe late September, mid-September. I think that's also within the realm of possibility. So in other words, I don't think it's too late, but the clock is ticking, and as every week passes, my confidence in these games coming out this year gets a little smaller. And I'm not even that confident to begin with, to be totally blunt with you. I think there's a chance, and I'm not saying it's a small chance, but it's also not something I'm willing to bet on at this point. I would not bet money on it at this point. That I am skeptical of. I'm hoping for it, I'm pulling for it. I think it's worth making a video about, but as every week passes, things are getting less and less likely. However, it's very clear Nintendo did not have a typical Direct this year. They've been having a number of shadow drops and announcements since the June period where we would have had an E3. We got the Bayonetta 3 thing, the Kirby thing, the Strikers DLC. There's information that keeps coming. We've been waiting for a number of things that we know need to come that haven't come yet, or at least one, and that's the Mario Kart DLC. Where is that? Nintendo is taking their time with making certain announcements that we know need to come out this year, or we believe are going to come out this year, and it's possible the Zelda remasters are a part of that. We shall see. But I'm very curious what you guys think. Is it too late for Twilight Princess and or Wind Waker HD to come out this year? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.